And Bob, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Bob.
I just want to take a few minutes. I got lost in step one, and we're supposed to do 1, 2, and 3, and so I kind of realized that towards the end. As I said, the steps are not mechanical. They're spiritual. If they were mechanical, every time we go through them, every time you had a problem, you just click your heels and say the third step prayer and you'd be back in Kansas. There just literally would be no issue because you said the magic words, And it isn't mechanical. If it's not mechanical, there's a way of bringing ourselves to the process. But because ultimately it's a process. So if we had someone who was in deep doo-doo and we wanted to help them, what would we want from them more than anything else? For me, I'd want surrender. I'd want that opening. I'd want a space to speak into. When we bring ourselves to the process, then wouldn't we want to bring surrender to that process? But because that's such a profound spiritual experience, how do you bring it? How do you, just because you're having trouble, can you snap your fingers and bring surrender? I find that I can't. So sometimes when I go through the steps, if I'm in a step workshop or something, it's dry. It's not, I'm doing it, but I don't feel like I'm getting out of the process sometimes what I'd like to get. And anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. It is literally. I mean, I absolutely mean that. That is not a joke. It's a funny statement, but it's a good thing. And interestingly, as Bill said, problems are the touchstones of growth. Suffering is pain is a touchstone of growth. Usually when I'm really more committed to that process, I'm in pain. But I'm blocked. What will help unblock me is spending some time in 1, 2, and 3, not going immediately to 4. And I don't know if any of you have the tendency to, I'm going to go do the steps, and we kind of rush through 1, 2, and 3, and we, get into 4. Number one. Number two, and first of all, I want to recognize everybody in this room. We're in this room because we're seekers and searchers, and we're on a spiritual path, and we're good members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we'd like to improve our lives and be able to be more effective at helping others. I get that. I think that's just, I think that's cool. And I'm here as a facilitator in that. Harold and I are here as facilitators in that conversation. We couldn't be having the conversation, and the quality of the conversation that you can have is due to who you speak to. There is pitching and catching. If you don't have good catchers, all the balls end up in one place. You need both of those things. You need a listening to be able to speak into, to have it be what it is at its best. So going back and understanding when I'm troubled in my life that I am powerless and my life is unmanageable. I cannot manage my life. The biggest problem we have, and I'll probably come back to this because it's my latest new idea. When you're working with a new person and they start to feel free to talk to you, what they often do when you ask them how they are, they do the dump. They tell you about, the bad checks, the car license, the IRS, the alimony, whatever child support stuff that's going on. They're just in trouble in most areas of their lives, and they're often unemployed, and it's just a mess. And they do the dump. They live their lives in a cocoon of circumstance, okay? They don't understand the creation of it. They may not have yet been able to take responsibility for it. The dawning of the idea that all the consequences that I have today, I created. As Harold talked about, I love that, the 5 great delusions. It is one of the most important breakthroughs that we're going to have. But understanding today that most of us, I don't believe, understand that we can't manage our own life. And even we are now using the AA as the tool to manage our lives. So what we bring to the process is our knowledge and experience with the steps. Now, not like that's bad, but for many of us in that process, it's of the mind, not of the heart. Bringing your mind to a spiritual process is like bringing a knife to a gunfight. It is the wrong tool. It has to be present, but it has to be a junior partner. If it is the dominant partner, you're going to underline your book to death. You are going to look for the correct method of doing it. You're going to do it like you're not going to miss anything. If you do it as a beginner, if you do it as a surrenderer, if you do it as I can't do it. If there's a message that I would give to people who have been around for a while, you can't even do the steps. Not only can you not manage your own lives, you can't do the steps on your own. And when I really understand that if I don't join up in this process with my essence, which is God, I'm not going to have the result that is promised to me, and I don't do it perfectly. I do it poorly. There are times I do it that it doesn't work. But if I were designing how I would want to be, I want to be a beginner, and I want to be surrendered, and I want to understand, good Lord, that I'm entering a process that is not about knowing, and it absolutely is not about doing. It is about being. When you be, doing and having flow out of being. But having and doing don't bring you to being. And there is a sense of reverence and humility in that process that sets the foundation for the inventory. It is always like the Bible always talks about, it seems like this urgency that Christ is coming back and, don't worry about anything. When we're first sober, there's this feeling like, God, I'm sober, my life is, I have a chance, there is this, good God. There's an exuberance. There's a feeling of not being alone. That is one of the most that feeling of not being alone. In my worst, when I am, when I talked about the new person bringing the dump and the problems, being owned by the circumstances of their lives, there's only two places to stand. You either have your ego and intellect, or you're grounded in your program in God. In ego and intellect, I am the only thing that matters, and it is the only thing that's happening. When I'm in a spiritual paradigm, I am not as important, and it is not as important. There is a space in that paradigm. So when you call that new person or talk to them, and you've asked them a little bit later how they are, and they say, "Oh, I'm okay. I was a little nuts on Tuesday, but I'm okay." All of a sudden, they're not talking about it. They're talking about how they're maintaining their spiritual condition, even though they don't know they're talking about how they're maintaining their spiritual condition. They're talking about how they're responding to it. And all of a sudden, And that's the magic. When you go from it to being responding to it, you are no longer the captive of it, and you are in a holy place. You are starting a spiritual journey, and you don't even realize it. But that's the conversation that shifts from it and them to my higher power and myself. It is no longer as important as what's happening. What's important is how I am being in the process of responding to life. Life is happening to everyone. Lastly, we really need to go back and get rid of our old ideas about God as we understood God. I grew up in a time of Catholicism where there was a lot of focus on sex and sin. I thank God for Francis that he's shifting a lot of that. Life is about love. This is a school. The subject is love. If you want to know how your program's working, are we moving towards love? Are we a more loving husband? Are we a more loving father? Are we a more loving employee? Are we better lovers? That's the demonstration. Bottom line. It is not how many merit badges do you have, how many meetings you go to, how many people you sponsor, all good stuff. That's not the measure. The measure is how's your life? What's your demonstration? And when I measure my life on my demonstration, it's always lacking. But I don't know anybody in life for whom it is not. There's anybody. When I beat myself up, one of the questions I ask anybody, do you know anybody who has it all together? We tend to talk so much about what we're doing in Alcoholics Anonymous that a lot of us don't talk enough about what we're doing in our own lives. It is easy to talk about doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if it's about life, is there anybody here that's absolutely knocking it out of the park? If you're married with children and employed, you've got 3 feet of water over your head. It is as a demanding period of time in your life, it would be almost inexplainable. You're out of your reach all the time and out of control all the time. And this idea of running on empty because we're being empowered. We're not going to go fill up our own tank. We're empowered. It is, and going back and building that foundation for the inventory in 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, which is kind of the work. We talk about all the steps. But to get ourselves positioned to have the work done through us, not just alone by us. Our level of unmanageability is so deep and so profound we can't by ourselves do the steps. So thank you.
Picking up kind of where Bob was at in that third step, as we lead into the fourth step, it says that we look back in our lives and we see that we made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. And my life is full of those things, and so now we're going to get into the inventory of, making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And I never took any ownership. I never took a personal inventory of my life whatsoever. My defense mechanism in life started long before I ever took in alcohol in my life. I never knew how to explain. Our book talks about our lives are driven by 100 forms of fear, self-pity, and self-delusion. It drives us, it drives us, it drives us. And I give you an example of how it drove me. When I was 11 years old, I was doing a series of burglaries. I got arrested and put on indefinite probation and continued into crime, and it got sent to Boys Town, Missouri. Now, this darkness in our mind, we talk about it all the time, this 100 forms of fear, self-pity, and self-delusion, the stuff that drives us in our life. You can call it the voices, you can call it the noise, you can call it the alcoholism, the wasm, the enemy, the lower power, the devil himself. I don't care what you want to call it, but just acknowledge that there's, a darkness, a spiritual warfare that's going on between my ears that drives me. What you think about me paralyzes me. You absolutely own me. And I'm sitting in this car on my way to Boys Town, Missouri. My life's about to totally change. Going out of the protection under my little safe haven, living in my mother's house, to an all-boys camp. A series of repeats that just trended for me for many years after that. But here starts the progression. So I'm sitting in the car on my way to Boys Town, Missouri, and the committee's in the car. I call them the boys. The boys are in the car, and we're going to hold council. And this is what they're talking about, that 100 forms of fear, self-pity, how it drives us. Because as we're driving down the road, the boys say to me, we're going to an all-guys camp, and your name is Harold, and the name Harold sucks, all right? It just does. And my middle name's Eugene, so you can't use that, right? And my last name's Long, so you take that acronym and it spells hell. And that's what it was like trying to be cool with that name. I mean, it was bad. And there wasn't any other Harolds around. I mean, so that was always a conflict. You go up and spray paint graffiti on the side of the bridge and write Harold, in real cool letters. Then you get home and it dawns on you, there is no other Harolds. So then you got to run right back up there and spray sucks out there, right? Cover your tracks. But that name, I hated that name. Absolutely hated that name. And by the time we made that little hour and a half jaunt down the highway and got off the exit to go to Boys Town, Missouri, I changed my name to Jeffrey Allen Long, and that's what my name stayed till I came to Alcoholics Anonymous for many years. My sister still likes to call up and ask for Jeff and laughs hysterically every time. Is Jeff there? Yeah. I got a handful of survivors from back in the day that are part of my social media friends, and sometimes I'll put a post in there and they'll be sincere to go, hey Jeff, I know what you're talking about. I just bust out laughing. I think it's hilarious. But it's funny today, but man, I'm telling you, it owned me back then. And that's what drove me. So when we get into this 4-step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, if you ask me any time in my life prior to that, is how you doing, kid? I'm good. I'm fine. Give you a head nod. I mean, that was my only response. I had no skills whatsoever to be able to communicate to you, even begin to communicate to you what was going on between my ears. I had no idea how to do that. And like Bob talked about, alcohol calmed that down, but now the alcohol is removed, and the root of the problem is, and I shared that last night, that I crashed and burned at 3 years, and I finally humbled myself to sponsorship, and I knew he was going to say we need to take the steps, If we did it, I did the 3rd step. I knew he was going to say we did the 3rd step, and I thought we were going to go in his living room. He says, no, let's go down to the meeting tonight. And I said, the meeting? He goes, yeah, let's just go down to the meeting. We'll do the 3rd step prayer with the meeting tonight. And I'm just terrified of this, the 100 forms of fear and self-pity. I mean, this is driving me, and I'm just terrified. So the whole meeting, the pucker effect was in full force. I'm just sitting there, not in a good place. And that's back when we all smoked in the meetings. Everybody smoked. This guy smoked a big cigar. Just blew out the room. Finally gets down there in the meeting and says, is there any announcements? And I couldn't say anything. And Roy goes, Harold's got an announcement. And I said, yeah, I got an announcement. I'm decided to finally really give into this thing and work the steps. And my sponsor suggests that I do the 3rd step prayer with this group. If you don't mind, I'm going to get down on my knees and do the 3rd step prayer. And I've never seen it happen before, but everybody in the room got down on their knees and did a 3rd step prayer with me. And I like to tell you, I woke up with a big halo around my head, and I just felt excited. But I was messed up, man. I was like this. I just made the connection, man. But next came the inventory. And I had never taken a personal inventory of my life, ever. I never took a look at my life. I knew what a knucklehead I was. Intuitively, I knew what a knucklehead I was. I knew what a lure was. I knew I was a liar. I knew I was a cheat. I knew I was a thief. I know I spent the majority of my life trying to be something that I wasn't. I was trying to spend my life trying to be something I thought you wanted me to be, and I was caught in that crossfire and caught in that battle. But here we are at the inventory, and our book says we get a lot of energy goes into technique. You need to do it just how the book says to do it, or some people show up with a Hazelden guide, or you go and Google it online and you can find 1,000 different forms for doing a 4-step. But our book says the only thing that matters, the only thing that counts is thoroughness and honesty. That's the key thing. And just to tackle those two things for the alcoholic is hard. to be real. For most of us, it's the first time we've ever got honest in our lives about anything. I mean, we finally get honest about our drinking and the effects it's having on our life, but now we're challenged to take a look at our life, take real ownership for our life. And I struggled with this part, man. I mean, I didn't even know where to begin. I mean, I didn't know that I had resentments. And I'll be honest with you, in the crowd I run in, we didn't talk about resentment. I never even heard the word. And that's being truthful. I never heard the word resentment in the country towns that I grew up with. Shit list, now that's a whole different thing. We understood that, man. You know, I'm pissed off, you know. But the resentment just sounded some like grandiose word. I don't have any resentment because I didn't know what it meant. So immediately my response is I don't have any of it. And but my sponsor made it real clear, do you have any conflicts in your life? Have you ever had any conflicts? I said, man, I've had all kinds of conflicts. And so our book talks about resentment's the number one offender, and it blocks us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Now I'm a redneck, so I love redneck analogies, and this is the way my sponsor gave it to me. He said, look at it like this. It's just like if we took this piece of plyboard, son, and we went outside and we laid it in the grass and we left it there for a couple weeks, and we went back and lifted the plyboard up, what would happen to the grass underneath it? And I said, well, it'd be yellow and starting to die. And he said, and if you put the piece of plyboard back down and you left it there for another couple of weeks and came back, what would happen? I said, it would be dead. It would be bare earth. Everything on earth would be dead. Well, that's what resentment does on your soul, boy. And your little heart is just covered with all kinds of pieces of plyboard that's blocked you off from this thing we call higher power, the spiritual connection. It's blocked you off from the relationships in your life. It's blocked you off from life in general, your entire life. And it blew me away. I mean, I just had no idea. I was clueless to that. Our book says to conclude that others was wrong is about as far as most of us ever got. And that was the absolute case in my case. I was quick to point out where you were at fault. So this whole process of taking a look at myself and in the book makes it real clear that a life lived in this disposition leads to fertility and unhappiness. You know, that you can't survive this way. You can't live and be happy and I believe sane in your life and have the anger that goes on inside us, you know. In my life, when I started doing our book talks about our fears, our resentments, and it says that fancy to real, they had the power to destroy us. Well, I mean, so much of my life, when I did this inventory for the first time, what I discovered about my life was how much of my life was just a fantasy, was just an illusion. I proceeded to be one way and was totally something else. I would sit down and say, I resent Bob, Uncle Bob. We'll call him Uncle Bob. I resent Uncle Bob. Why? Because he doesn't like me. Well, did he ever tell you he didn't like you? No, he never told me he didn't like me. Well, I mean, did he tell somebody else that he didn't like you? No, he never told anybody else he didn't like me.
I don't like you.
I told you we have a trouble with being honest, you know. It's, deep down he loves me, man. But I'm just saying. But it's that disconnect that we don't like, that he don't like me. And I go through life and I had this whole perception. And how long has it been since you seen Bob? 20 years, my whole life. So you haven't had, no, I haven't had anything to do with the guy for 20 years. And there was no truth based on anything. It was just based on this fear, this whole make-believe, and I had a whole world of that. Now, believe me, I had a lot of stuff that had substance to it. I had a dad that was never a part of my life. I mean, you could have took a picture of my soul, and what would have been there would have been a picture of my soul with a great big cutout in the middle of the image of a dad. Don't think that a dad don't make a big difference in your life, you know, and I didn't have one. You know, that's why I had a tendency to gravitate to older guys in my life for experience and strength and hope in my life, because I didn't have it. But yet I didn't know that I had any connection with that because I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad. My dad was dead for 2 years before I ever even found out he was dead. That should tell you where our relationship was. I found that out. He died in 1986, 1988 after I was in sobriety. I found out my dad had killed himself. That shows you where our relationship was at. But yeah, when I got to this inventory, my sponsor said, well, I want you to write about your dad. I said, well, I really don't have no resentment about my dad. But let me tell you what I did have. I had a lot of resentment, but I had a whole series of make-believe. Because when I started writing about my dad, I started looking back at all the lies I used to tell people about my dad. The guy that I wanted him to be, you know. I used to tell him how bad he was, how tough he was. My dad whipped your dad. My dad was this. My dad was that. My dad wasn't any of those things. My dad was an alcoholic, you know. I didn't know that he was an alcoholic at that time in my life. I just knew he wasn't there, you know. Absolutely didn't know he was there. But my whole inventory was full of that stuff. just full of stuff, and then I peel back down, and most of it wasn't even real. You know, the same thing happened with our fears when I started listing all my fears. You know that 85% of the stuff we worry about never happens. It never happens, but we give all our energy to it. You know, I had a whole list of fears in my life and how my life was, you know, where it was at. And most of the stuff never ever happened in my life. So when I got done with this inventory for the first time and sharing, like Bob said, the first time I did it was really a confession. You know, because here's what I tell you about inventories. I mean, I'm in the prison system, and all of our work in prison is step-based. It's all step workshops. We wrote workshops. We've been doing workshops since the early 90s. I don't know how many 5 steps, 4 steps I've been through. A lot. Hundreds of guys. And here's what I can tell you about all of them. You can wad them all up in a piece of paper, put them in a brown paper shack, and shake them and pull them out. It's the same inventory. Different town, different genre, different set of circumstances, but everything else, the substance is the same. Every single time. And what are the secrets of the 4-step? It's usually a crime or plural crimes that I committed that I've never been held accountable for, or it has something to do with my sex conduct. You know, I read an article not long ago talking about sex and addiction, and the statistics in today's times that 66% of all people in treatment today have been sexually abused. And out of that 66%, a third of those is inside the family, incest inside the family. So to think that sex doesn't have drive your addiction and drive your behavior is an understatement of the year. You know, and so this is where the secrets lie. It's where my secrets are at. I had crimes that I committed I've never been held accountable for. I had a whole lot of sex conduct I was never going to talk to anybody about. You know, just never going to talk to anybody about it. Not even a priest. Not even a guy behind a door and a piece of glass was I about to share any of that stuff. That stuff owned me. It absolutely owned me in my life. But I had a sponsor, and that 5th step was beautiful. And that's why I love doing it with another member of Alcoholics Anonymous that's actually done this, because they know the exchange, the communion that needs to go on here. And they share their gross handicaps, and it made it a whole lot easier for me to share mine. And that was such a spiritual transformation for me. And then my sponsor opened up about his life. And for the first time, I was able to talk to people about what actually happened in my life. You know, the reality of the truth about my life and the stuff that I had done. It started long before I even drank. Bob talked about his criminal ways, but mine was the same way. I mean, I had a criminal mind and criminal thinking long before alcohol ever come into place. I was a taker of things and a user of people, man. I mean, that's my life was geared to that. I planted that flag and do what I want, when I want, how I want, early in the game. So I was able to finally disclose, you know, when I was a young kid, I hanging around older guys, I hang around some bad characters, some rough characters. And they got me to engage in sexual activity that I never signed up for, never knew existed. And that was how I was introduced into the world of sex by a group of older guys. And a piece of rubber hose about as long, shorter than this table. And being whipped with it and smacked around and told this is what you're going to do. And being a defenseless kid, you give in to those ideas. And then you walk through, and then that's your sex conduct set for the rest of your life. And the time you leave home, you're 15 years old, 16 years old, you're sleeping on the streets, hanging out in houses, sleeping with women old enough to be your mother. That was my sex conduct going through my life. And you walk in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and expect your life to be different and wonder why you're all jacked up in this area of your life with all these secrets. You know, I was totally separated from you. I was enslaved to you. I had so much bitterness and resentment in my life, I didn't even know where to begin. But yet I would have told you I didn't have any of it because I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how to get to it. There's something magical about doing an inventory. There's a space that's created between here and this table. And there's something magical when you take what's up here and you get it down on this piece of paper in a structured format. The inventory in a big way, I think, is just fine the way it is. Works real good. It's a process. But the only thing that counts at the end of the day is have I been thorough and have I been honest. And I need somebody to help me be honest. I can do it and think I've been honest. And he talked about it last night, I mean, in great detail, beautifully. I was about a 65% guy. I was probably a 50% guy of what was really going on in my life. It's the amazing thing about the alcoholic, and it's still true today, and it amazes me to death about the personality of the alcoholic, that we will defend the very thing that's killing us still today in Alcoholics Anonymous. All these years sober, walking through life, we'll defend and protect the very thing that's killing us. It's like walking around with a shank in our back, man. The pain's excruciating. You can see it on my face. Everybody can see it. It's like, dude, you got a shank in your back. Yeah, but it's not as bad as it looks. You know, I got this, right? It's not that bad. It's going to be okay. And we want to turn and we just defend it, the very thing that's killing us. whether it's our sex conduct, whatever, but there's a price to be paid for all that. And I took that same behavior and I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And what happened with that behavior? I ran into, I come into the rooms, I didn't get involved in steps, I didn't get involved in nothing. I got involved in fellowship, met an AA girl, AA boy meets AA girl on campus, and a child was born out of that. And ultimately, in that few short months, this lady decided she didn't want to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, be in recovery. She wanted out, wanted away from me and away from you and away from everybody. And off she left. Here I am left defenseless. Broke, nothing, 2 cents to write to my name. But I put all this stuff together, and the long story short, I ended up in court 3 years later trying to have rights to this child. And by this time I'm sober, and I think I'm doing great. I think life's wonderful. And I'm sitting in this courtroom. I got people from AA there. I got my boss there. I got family there. I'm riding high on the hog. Nothing's really changed in my life other than I've been sober for 3 years. And I don't want to take nothing away from that. My life changed a lot in that 3 years of time. But really, the guy that I was still the guy that I was. And I'm sitting in this room, and this prosecutor gets up, and man, he tore me to pieces right there in this courtroom. I mean, he literally tore me to pieces. And by the end of it, I never forget it, he just put his thing down, this judge, and he said, we think it's in the best interest of this court that we remove your rights as a father and we allow this adoption. She had married this guy. I think she was having an affair with him to start with. And they had got married and they filed a countersuit to adopt, and we allowed this adoption to go through, and that's the decision this court has today. And I sat in the chair wherever Bob is, and I was just a broken guy. And this all happened without any alcohol in my life. This was the guy that I was. And I walked out of there, and it was the worst sentence I ever got in my life. And it was for sure going to be an 18-year sentence until the girl was 18 years old. That was in 1990. That girl's 20-something years old. I have a relationship with her today, but it isn't what I'd like it to be. But at the end of the day, I have to peel back and take ownership, and it's right back to that step 3. We look back in our lives, and we see where we made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt, right? And that's what happened. That's where the ownership come in. I had quickly could have got resentful, quickly could have moved to hate. But the challenges and our inventory challenges of looking at all this stuff in our life to set aside the wrongs others does. Now let's take ownership for our life. And this is where we get to the beauty of forgiveness, because this whole thing's about forgiveness. I said it last night, the 12 steps are to prepare us to go out and live a life we were really meant to live. Most of us have spent the majority of our life trying to live a life we were never meant to live. And now I'm being launched into an opportunity here. And this forgiveness comes in. I want to close my little session. I want to read some lyrics from a song that I think really summarize this whole thing of forgiveness, the whole inventory process. And I want you to listen to these lyrics because it really says it. It's the hardest thing to give away, and it's the last thing on your mind today. It always goes to those that don't deserve. It's the opposite of how you feel when the pain they cause is just too real. It takes everything you have just to say the word forgiveness. It flies in the face of all your pride. It moves away the mad inside. It's always anger's own worst enemy. Even when the jury and the judge say you got a right to hold a grudge, it's the whisper in your ear saying, set it free. It clears the bitterness away. It can even set a prisoner free. There is no end to what its power can do. So let it go and be amazed by what you see through eyes of grace. The prisoner that it really frees is you. And that's what happened with the 4-step. The 4-step set me free. And it becomes the Matthew West things that. And it's a lifelong practice. You know, it's where our inventory 12 and 12 tell. This whole idea of inventory is a lifelong practice of constantly going back and looking at my life. And I sit down and do no full blown out deal. But if I'm sponsoring other people and I'm accountable to my sponsor, I'm constantly trying to take a look at my life all the time and know that these things are going to crop up. I'm a fatally flawed human being. I'm a broken guy. I'm capable, you know, like my buddy Henry said, my life's great when I'm not involved in it, but I always want to be involved in it, you know? And I constantly got to peel this stuff back. And I constantly got to get real with myself. And this is the first process of doing that. And I've done a number of inventories in my life. And every one of them is self-revealing. Every one changes me a little bit different. But it was everything I could do the first one. It took everything I could muster, but it changed my life. It set me free. Is exactly what it did. Bob?
Thank you, Harold. Bob Alcoholic. When I left home, I left my big book. I have it on pages, printed out pages, and I left notes. I don't have many notes, but I have a few. We're entering a process that would start to get us in touch with the causes and conditions of our alcoholism. If our bottles are but a symptom, the causes and conditions lie elsewhere. Most of us would rather have the certainty of pain than the pain of uncertainty. Our resistance to change is profound. And we're about to enter a process that none of us would enter except for some reason. I mean, for many of us, we're Catholics that have, some experience with confession. But for most of us, an inventory process was a very foreign idea. Something that, believing in God might not have been a foreign idea, but an inventory process was something that was foreign to most of us. And when you enter that process with a stunted idea of God, either we're a bad person being punished for being bad, or we're a good person being punished by a bad God. There is no, warmth, love, for many of us, those relationships. Most of us abandon our child teaching of God in our teens and never return to them. Some of us were allowed to return, but many of us found ourselves that we didn't get an adequate return prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. And without understanding, later when we talk about some of the defects, when I talk about manhandling my kids, there was a time within our family that our middle boy started to manhandle our youngest, and I said, this crap's got to stop. This is like 4 generations old in our family, and the middle boy and I went to a psychologist. The psychologist asked me why I was there, and I said I'm there because there's a pattern going on in our family that I generated, and I really want it to stop. I said I generated a pattern. I was part of a pattern of alcoholism in our family. I was given the gift to get recovery. I want to stop this pattern in our family. And he looked at me and he said, were you an angry kid? And I said, no, I wasn't an angry kid. He said, I'll bet you became angry when you became a parent. I had a whole computer file called Dad sitting on a shelf. And when I became a parent, I booted it up. And my old man my father, my hero, started to jump out of my mouth. Now I'm responsible for whatever behavior was going on in our home, but I was influenced by old ideas that I had no idea that I was being influenced by. When Harold talks about the missing father, when we talk about the patterns of our lives, the vast majority of the influences that are affecting our lives are subconscious. They're not conscious. I mean, we all want to go talk about what we know, what we think, what we're aware of, when 80% of the instigating stimulus that's going on in our lives is subconscious. Interestingly enough, much of the stuck unreality in our subconscious gets healed in a spiritual process without even attending specifically to each and every item. And now we're going to present ourselves to an inventory process to try to get a sense of, there's 2 things. One, to get free of the things that we have done. To do that completely, we have to forgive ourselves and we have to forgive others. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the process. It seems like we're going to be nailing ourselves to a cross, but the fundamental aspect of the inventory and 5th step is to receive, I believe, to be freed, to receive forgiveness and to clean the mess up and 8 and 9. I find the book, as I go through it, to be, if we get too mechanical with the 4-step, we're going to be using the same words over and over again, and I find that they do not represent, they're too restrictive for me when I do my inventory process. And I just say that to you, they have the freedom to be able to add words, that, if they're, rather than it affects my self-esteem or my pocketbook or my image or whatever it is. If there's things that you need to add it. One of the goals that we're trying to get to when we're getting into 6 and 7 is to identify our defects of character. The two things that in the perfect world, we would like to have us and other people walk out of the 4th and 5th step is a list of amends, people that we owe amends to, and a list of our defects of character. I find that almost none of us go through that process and have an adequate list to do 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. I don't know if that would indicate that I need to do it more completely. I think, frankly, this is the part of the step that we overdo. Today, the religion of the world is psychology. When people come in with the 50-pager inventory, when they're back on the playground in grade school, when they're back, it is psychology that is leading, not spirituality, not gathering the pattern. What we really would hope to get out of most of that is the patterns. So and when we're making amends, it's important to have some completeness in that process. But I think there's Paul M. from Riverside, Illinois, who died with 64 years of sobriety. He wrote more articles, I think, in the Grapevine than anybody else. And he has, in the Grapevine, he has a 4-step thing that he did, and he has a list of character defects that he examined himself in the 4-step, kind of in addition. He used the 7 deadly sins and this list of a dozen or so things that I have in my notes that I do not have with me, that I think is worthwhile if you, I noticed it, and I think we can look that up, or I'll get it to Joe. Completeness is important. It is the idea. If we are intentionally incomplete in our 4th step when we go into our 5th step, we're going to damage its integrity for ourselves. It is, in essence, a very private, even though we're going to be doing it with another person, it's a very holy and it's a very private experience. And I would encourage all of us to be able, most of us have trouble attending to, I jokingly say, pretend I'm dealing with a guy who's doing a 4th and 5th step. He's 40 years old, married with children, and he's having trouble with the 4th step. And I say, don't worry about it. Just get your ex-wife and your wife and your kids, your mom and dad and one of your brothers and sisters and your boss and your ex-boss, and bring them over to the house, and here's what I want you to say. Just say, we have a step in Alcoholics Anonymous where we're trying to get in touch with our defects of character, and I'm having trouble identifying mine. And then pass out paper and pencils and leave the room. You'd have a hell of a start on an inventory. Might be a little rough, but it would be a hell of a start on an inventory. And it is interesting. And as an exercise, you could do that yourself, sitting in a chair, putting your sister in a chair, putting your brother in a chair, putting your father in a chair, putting your mother in a chair, and writing down what you think they would write down. And you would have an interesting, I don't know if it would be all realistic, but this is one of the great rites of passage in Alcoholics Anonymous. I find, as Harold talked about, when we first do it, we're just not up to the task usually. I was certainly young enough and naive enough that I was not up to what I would call the task today. But today people have better instruction. Today people are more schooled in the book than I was when I did it. I don't know that would make all that much difference when I was a 23-year-old kid. It would make some difference. It would have been more completely. But I don't think I would have been up, to facing what I faced at my breakdown when I was 7.5 years sober. It's really a great freeing process. We are about to open the door to, as Harold talks about so dramatically, a brand new life. I mean, we are, just getting the rocket ship ready. And this is one of the great building blocks in Alcoholics Anonymous, that we are going to start to connect with reality in our own lives. We're in a process where we're about to have our integrity restored. Most of us are living on top of so much unfinished business, so many lies, so many fears, so many resentments that we can't. So it's important to be complete, but it's also important not to get too caught up in the form. I think if there's a place in our program where we get caught up too much in the form, it is in the fourth and fifth step, and yet the form, when properly used, is the vehicle for the process. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you also can't so restrict ourselves in the form. We're doing 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we go into the fifth step, and for the first time in our lives, we're going to let it all go. And in that process, that's a sacred process. It's a spiritual process. To sit down with another person and share some of the most difficult things in our lives would not be something we would ever do without some sort of significant intention to change our lives. Now, we don't even know that. We're in AA, we're new, and it's time to do our 4 steps, so we start our 4th step. We often don't even understand that we're entering what the intentions are. We're literally going to change our entire lives, all of it. And the first thing we're going to do is to try to get an accurate assessment of it. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to share it with God, ourselves, and another human being, which would tend to indicate we hadn't done those 3 things ever before. We hadn't even shared it with ourselves. And we think God knows it already, but there's a difference when guys I know have people go look in a mirror and become aware of their inventory before they're about to step in and do a 5th step, so they can admit to themselves in the process of looking into the mirror. And before they walk in the room, go walk around the block and admit to God formally in the process to go do that, and then sit down with me. Ask God to come in the room and share the exact nature of our wrongs. That's a great process. It is one of the great rites of passage of Alcoholics Anonymous. And already in the 4th step and entering the 5th step, it's already told us that we're going to be forgiving the people that harmed us. It's already asked us to say a prayer for the people that had harmed us and let them out of jail. It's always a mystery to me, for those of us that have misbehaved so much, that we have trouble forgiving others. I mean, and we say the Lord's Prayer at many of our meetings. Harold said it, but the true freedom is in forgiveness. When Sandy talked about there's only 2, when you're having trouble with other people in your lives, there's only 2 things to do. There's either forgiveness or make an amend. And when he first said that to me, I thought, that's just simple. That's a gimmick. That's a slogan. And I have yet to find an exception in my life when I am troubled with a relationship or someone else, that the 2 consequences or subsequent actions that I need to take is either to forgive the person or to make an amend. And what always sticks me is being right. I'd rather be right than related. That seems to be always where it is. And that's the agenda of the ego, to make ourselves right, other people wrong, to control other people and to avoid being controlled, and to have, people's esteem. That's the agenda of the ego. And I'm about to enter 6 and 7. In 6 and 7, when Bill treated only in a paragraph in the big book, 2 paragraphs in the big book, it would seem like they weren't that important. They did not register on my screen the first time through the books. They were just first time through the book. It was just kind of obvious to me, I asked God to make me entirely ready I'm entirely ready to have God remove the defects of character, and then humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Yeah, of course, good. not really understanding that, I'll tell you, at 4 or 5, 6, and 7 years of sobriety, I really expected my shortcomings to be removed. I'm kind of an idealist, a little bit of a philosopher, and to be dealing with the stuff I was dealing with that I didn't even know about when I was drinking, and now they're eating my lunch, and I'm having serious time with this stuff. And our resistance and reluctance to change is more profound than we would ever imagine. That little joke I told about, bring over your relatives and your ex-wife and all those people who do the inventory. Most of us would not have that meeting. Why? We don't want to change. Not only do we not want to change, we don't want to know. We train each other on what we can say to each other. Your wife, starts talking about something, you want to talk about that, going to be a tough conversation. You train your boss into what they can say and not say. You train, hell, your sponsees know what they, you know what they say. There's so much nonverbal stuff going on in the world. When you go to talk to certain sponsees, you just know it's a dead conversation. It's not on the table. It's on the table as a complaint, but it's not on the table as a piece of business. Most of our lives, the issues that we have, the defects of character, live at the level of complaint. They are not pieces of business. And when we get serious, 6 and 7, for those of us that have been sober a little while, when you start to discover that they just don't fall off by themselves, many of the major things do fall off, such as the power and the grace of surrender. Many of the things that we could not do without drinking leave without obviously intentional, they just fall off because we're not drinking and we're in the program and we're trying our best to change our way of life. But the more subtle ones, so when Joe and I were talking in the car, the things that stop you, Joe talks about, we get rid of the felonies pretty quickly. But it's the misdemeanors that stop you from having a marriage, stop you from having a career, stop you from having the fullness of your life, to be able to play the instrument that you were designed to change, and that is step 6 and 7. And I think 6 and 7, I'll get to it, but I think the promises in step 10 speak to what happens in step 6 and 7. It happens through us, not by us. And you think, that's too easy, because they haven't gone. I'm 7, 8, 10 years sober, 6 years sober. They're not gone. What do you mean it happens through us? They're not gone. And I'm saying, well, maybe we haven't put them up as a piece of business. But when they really do fall out, it's like you just leave them. It is time. They no longer have the hold and they no longer have the pull. They just aren't us, and we leave them. When I was ready to quit gambling, I just left it. You get a few temptations, there's a few skid marks, but I just left it. That was my past. That was a part. When I finally got to the point where I took responsibility for the anger and rage that I sometimes expressed in my family with my children, it just was gone. It was time. And there comes a time, in my early sobriety, I tried to get rid of all those defects of character. I tried and failed, but I still grew. But there comes a time, it's kind of like in church when they talk about the age of reason. There comes a time where you either change or you stop growing. And at that point, you start making deals. We'll get together, we'll talk about the traditions, we'll talk about AA, we'll talk about the steps, but you don't get in my past, you don't get in my face, you don't talk to me about my crap, I don't talk to you about your crap. Deal? Bad deal. Chasers hang out with the chasers, gamblers hang out with the gamblers. Deal? When you reach that point where you either change or you stop growing, you either change and get deeper into the program and get deeper into the steps, or you build an addition onto your house to accommodate the problem. And the reason why we often don't enter that space and clean it up is because we become identified with the problem. It isn't what we do, it's who we think we be. It's who I am. It's not who you am, it's what you do. You can go from a Ford to a Chevrolet, it doesn't change who you are. You can go from a Democrat to a Republican, it doesn't change who you are. You can get rid of a behavior. It's just behavior. It's not skin and bones. It's not your soul. It's not your essence. It's behavior. Choose. The problem that most of us have is we're conflicted. All you can eat $2. I want $4 worth. I want to gamble. I don't want to gamble. We talk as if we don't want to gamble. We don't talk about, I want to gamble. We're just conflicted. It's a normal condition of human beings. Choose. Choose. You're just conflicted. Feed the part of you that wants the answer, and starve the part of you that is immersed in the problem. One of the greatest fundamental principles of Alcoholics Anonymous is we don't treat the problem. We go to the solution. That seems antithetical. It seems not workable. It seems goofy. We literally, in almost all cases, don't treat the problem. We don't manage it and we don't control it. We live in the solution. The problem cannot live in the solution. It starves itself to death in the answer. And it is one of the greatest spiritual principles that I've come across, and it's what we regularly do all the time. It is just one of the, you're either at the problem, you're at the level of the problem, or you're in the solution. When you first hear that sounds like a gimmick. And don't worry about that child, that's not going to bother me. Isn't that nice that that would no longer bother me? That used to be a crying child was one of the hardest things for me to be around. But when you think of that we have, in this process, we are leaving the level of the problem. When I spoke before about the transition of the internal dialogue from the circumstance to our response to the circumstance, and now through inventory and being entirely ready to have, through inventory, through the fifth step, through forgiveness, we are about to ask that our defects of character be removed. That is not going to be an immediate process. But the problem that I think that saps some of the energy of our souls for us older members is we have excluded certain items. And all of us have certain items that we have not dealt with. I mean, we're just human beings. We are never going to get to the point where we're going to do it all or do it all perfectly. But if they are blocking our joy, if they are blocking our peace, to be a spiritual traveler, to be a spiritual warrior, it's through the fire. It's not around the fire. But the fire is illusionary. We've had the greatest example we could possibly have that most of us were slaves to our addiction. And we found an answer. We walked through the fire and it turned out to be an illusion, and on the other side was a freedom that we had never, a life and a freedom we had never experienced. And as we refined, many of us kick ourselves for what mediocre members of AA we were early in our recovery, and in some cases in the middle of our recovery. It's the nature of a spiritual walk. You're ready when you're ready. You can hear when you hear. This isn't good guys and bad guys. This is knowing and not knowing. It's not good guys and bad guys. It's knowing and not knowing. But knowing will change you.
Thanks, Bob. And I just totally relate to that. It's compartmentalized is what happens in our life. You just walk into our life and you look at all these compartments in our life, and you open this life and it's like we're sold out. In this life we're like 50%, in this part of our area we're 60%, and we go through and it's just the same old stuff.
Get closer to the mic.
And it becomes the same old thing that we're doing, and we do it over and over, just repeat it over and over and over and over again. And it's amazing how we continues to do these things, but it is part of just being a fatally flawed human being. But accountability is so huge in all that process, and it's so easy to want to keep things in the dark. But nothing grows in the dark. This whole process of becoming godly is Father Dowling they write about in the first paragraph on step 6. Those that are willing to exercise these principles in other areas of their life can truly tell, that they're after God's own heart, that you're trying to become a godly person. But you're not going to do it perfect. It's a process. You're going to fall off the horse, and many times you got to get up and dust your pants off and get back on the horse again. But it's easy to keep secrets, and the pride and the fear of the bogeymen, right? The pride and the fear of what they get in our way. They're very powerful enemies. They're the chief activators of all of our shortcomings, all of our character defects in our life. Many years ago, I was struggling. I was one of those guys that listened to the idea that we're not going to get involved with any girls the first year, so I chose not to do that. And I got involved in music, and with guys, and I got involved in music, played a lot of music. But there was an Italian girl that was coming, always wore a red dress, came to a lot of my shows, and day 365, 366, we were going out to the day, to the hour. And she was crazy. I was nuts, but she was really crazy. And she was Italian on top of it. And everybody in my life is going, man, you got to get away from that girl. And I'm like, well, you don't understand, man. I love this girl. But then I'd be telling you I hate her the next sentence. I was just so caught up. Pride says I didn't have to get rid of her. You can handle it. The fear said I dare not, because I'll never meet another. And I finally went down to this meeting at this hospital, and there's an African-American man there named Lewis T. And Lewis is awesome. He's about 50 years sober now. He lives out in California, if he's even still alive. But he was one of the best old-timers in St. Louis, and he was awesome. No education. He was a janitor at a hospital most of his life, always well overweight, diabetes. But he was awesome. His soul was alive, and he talked like B.B. King. Yeah. And he gave me a great lesson that day. I sat in a meeting, and it was on step 10, and I was on step none, at the time. But I lay out my whole issue with this gal, and these people are trying to tell me to get away from her, and I don't want to get away from her, and why can't people mind their own business, and blah, 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 blah. And this is what he said to me, and I'll never forget it. Changed my life. And this applies to everything that Bob just got done talking about. He says, well, Harold, sounds like you got a problem with the crap sandwich. And I said, all right, Lewis, I'll play along. What's the crap sandwich? And he goes, well, the pride's one piece of bread and the fear's the other. And you know what the problem with the crap sandwich is, Harold? I said, what's that, Lewis? You're the one eating it. Right? You're the one eating it. And many times throughout my sobriety, just dying on that stuff, right? And it's just crap. But we'll try to protect it, man. We'll try to protect the very thing that kills us. But this whole thing of 6 and 7, as we charge through the end of step 5, it says, we're building an archway where we're going to walk through a free man. We're trying to become free at last. And never knowing that we were really enslaved to start with. Under the delusion that we're in control of our own life, So the biggest lie that we buy into in our entire lives is that somehow or another I'm really in control of what's going on. Like Bob talked about, he said 80%. I'd probably subscribe to this like 99% of what I do is at a subconscious level. I just respond to life automatically. I don't think about it. I just respond. I've been conditioned that way, good, bad, or ugly. But here we're trying to be conditioned to a new way of life and a new set of principles. And man, it's a journey, it's a process, and and I have moments of glory and I have moments of defeat, But what I see a lot of us do, I did it, is I want to hang my problems, I want to hang it on being an alcoholic. I'll sit in the meeting and say, I burned my checking account into the ground, I'm way behind. I wrote a bad check to Peter and robbed Paul from it, just all the way down the line. And it says, but it's because I'm alcoholic, It's because I'm still sick, No, it's because you suck at money. This is the reality. You suck at handling money, dude. That's the real truth, But we want to label these things and make shortcuts and justify the same old stuff we've done our whole life or why our life's in the tank. And it all comes back down to ownership. It's just like, we have so much pride to say, I'm 10 years sober and I'm really struggling with my finances. I'm 15 years sober and I'm really having trouble with pornography or the opposite sex or whatever, because of the pride says you don't dare now, you can big enough, your big boy pants on, your spiritual pride jumps up, you've been around, you talk this stuff, you sponsor all these guys, you do all this stuff, you ought to be able to man up and handle it. And the fear says you dare not, because if you tell these people the truth, they're going to move away, they ain't going to love you, they ain't going to respect you, they're going to talk bad about you, so you don't do anything. And the next thing you know, Joe's hanging from a tree somewhere, he hung himself. And I had to bury one of the best guys that I knew in Alcoholics Anonymous, started one of the best AA groups, him and his wife in St. Louis, Missouri, still one of the largest groups there today. And 3 years ago, I did his eulogy with over 500 people in the room. And if he would have told me there would come a day that he would have took his life, I would have said, you're out of your mind. This guy was a rock star in AA. But we're as sick as our secrets. And he had a secret. And sex conduct is where I see a lot of dirty little secrets come out and get us, because we're unwilling to look at that area of our life, or try to control it. But this is what got him. And eventually, the drink wasn't a solution for him. Going out and hanging himself was. Left behind 3 beautiful kids. It was a tragic thing. Hardest thing I ever had to do was stand up there and do that eulogy with this kid sitting in the front row. It broke my heart. But I totally identify with what happens in their life, and how we get broken and how we get separated. But this whole thing is about, causes and conditions, and it's taking a look at our life, that there's a lot more to my problem than just alcohol, that I have a lot of flaws. I'm a fatally flawed human being. I have been all my life. I was born that way. I was born broken. You don't think so? If you have kids, I'm telling the truth. Kids, one of the first words we ever learn, ever comes out of our word is what? Mine. It's mine. It's mine. It's mine. We didn't have lessons in our house how to do that. How to hit another kid. That's what we're going to study next week. We're going to study how to hit another kid. We just start doing these things right out the gate. We're just broken people. But at the same time, as you go through these things and you start to tear apart the step, you start to discover the real truth about it. So there's a lot of magic that comes from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th step. And it's a discovery process. And you just see how you've been enslaved and bought into a lot of delusion. A lot of my delusion was I wasn't a smart guy. That was the truth. I quit school when I was 13 years old, just quit. I was done. I just wanted to drink, raise hell, rock and roll, just get out of my way. But then I come into recovery, I got a lot of opportunities, I got a lot of breaks, and I got into an industry through a lot of grace, a lot of mercy. And it came time to take this test. They gave me the green light. We're going to allow you to come in. We're going to make some exceptions for you. Take the test. I didn't study. I didn't pass. So immediately I just say, and I missed by 1 point. And then my comment was, well, I'm not, to myself, I'm just not smart enough to do this. I just cannot do this. And ultimately, my sponsor challenged me. He goes, why don't you try something called studying? Try it out and see if it works for you. And lo and behold, I study it and I pass the test. And I go in, I get educated, I get a bunch of initials behind my name. And eventually I get a chance where I have to go to I hit a roadblock in life and it's time to do a formal education. Son, you need a formal education. Right away I go, well, I can't do it. I tried to get a GED while I was in college and I failed miserably. I can't do it. And they said, why don't you just suck it up and go back to school if you can't do it? So here I am, 30-something years old, in recovery, have a successful career, successful life, making good money, got a wife, got kids. But I want to go further, and I'm being encouraged to go further, so I go sign up for GED classes at a community college. And I walk in, I sit down, I'm shirt and tie, just come from work. And the lady walks in, and it's the lady who teaches GED at the prison I go to. And I couldn't believe it. Her name was Sherry. And she goes, what are you doing in my class? And I said, I'm taking it. And she goes, get out. You're not taking a class. I said, I'm taking your class. And I couldn't look at anybody else because they're all a bunch of 15, 16-looking Euro crazy people. Tatted out, nuts and bolts hanging off all over everything. It looked like they fell out, fell in the nut and bolt section at the hardware store, and just went with it. And I remember there's a guy sitting next to me, young kid, big old leather jacket, a big old psychedelic mohawk, yeah. And I had to look, it was amazing, it was impressive. And he says, what are you looking at? And I said, being quick, I just said, well, I made love to a parrot one time. And I thought you might be one of my kids, And he even chuckled. He goes, good one, man, that was a good one. But I took the class. I passed the exam. And I scored really high on it. And I got to go to college. And I went to a Christian college, something faith-based, because I really just wanted to be in a faith-based thing. I was trying to live a godly life, and I wanted to go to Christian school. Was the bottom line. And I went to a Christian school. I did well enough. I stayed on the dean's list all the way through school. I went into a master's program. I wrote a thesis on a business that I own and operate today. And I got all the accolades out of that. But at the beginning of that, I told you I wasn't smart enough to do any of it. And because of the pride, because of the fear. But I was able to face that over time through sponsorship, through a early election, and it changed my life. I'm telling you that you got a life where God wants to take you. And this whole thing, the 12 steps, is preparation to become that person. It's what it's all about in the big scheme of things. God wants to do amazing things with your life. I mean, it's incredible where he wants to take your life, but you got this dark side in your mind that says you're dumb enough, you got too big a record, you've been a felon your whole life, you blah, 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 blah. And we listen to this stuff. But hopefully through this process, the ice starts to melt around our heart, we start to be free, we start to become freer, and we start to see the big picture. And that's what this thing's all about. 6 and 7 is all about character building. It's all about humility. And the humility is really one word, it's honesty. I need sponsorship in my life more today than I ever had in my life. To have somebody that's not emotionally involved in my life that can look at my life constructively. Because I can't see it for what it is, because I'm emotionally involved in it. I want it to be something that it's not. Or I want to look at it a way it's not. And I got a sponsor coming in just like, sounds like a bunch of crap to me. Sponsors are great. They are for that reason. I need it more than anybody today. But 6 and 7 is all about character building. It's all becoming the guy, the man or the woman that God created you to be. And I'm telling you, it's awesome. And wherever you're at in life, I'm telling you, you'll shortchange yourself for what God has in store for you. It really will. Go ahead, Bob. Take us home.
2 minutes. Someone once said that true nobility is not being superior to your fellow man. It's being superior to your former self. And I think that is what 6 and 7 offer us. I think we don't understand our resistance to change at the depth that it is. And I think we don't understand the fear of the unknown that we have in our lives. And we are people that, interestingly enough, are not afraid to die. If you said that in most congregations, they would be shocked. We're afraid to live. I don't know what that is, but that statement applies to me. And there is a reluctance, but to have the opportunity to have the full measure of your life, to bring the uniqueness that you are, the gifts that you are. We are not undersupplied people. We are not under intelligence. We are not undersupplied in terms of gifts. But most of us have impeded our progress, certainly in our alcoholism. We just burnt it to the ground. And we haven't, when we walk in here, we are caught in the paradigm of survival. All we want is enough to get by. I know guys that were, if it took them 12 grand a year to live, if they accidentally made 8 grand in the first 6 months, they'd slow down their earning power the last 4 months, so they hit the 12 grand. It is because we have our internal compass on survival. It's almost as if we have to take the top off the box to get rid of the old idea to be able to have plenty, to be able to start to demonstrate beyond the confines of that old idea that's been holding us back. And I think constantly God is saying to us, over here, come home, come all the way in, sit all the way down. And that process is set up in the first 3 steps, and 4, 5, 6, and 7 are the spiritual grounding for 8 and 9, and 8 and 9 are the booster rocket. Thank you. See you at 1:30, right, Joe?
All right, guys.